While I was watching Spider-Man No Way Home, I had a revelation that I couldn't believe I didn't realize before. This is Spider-Man's origin story. And no, not just Spider-Man No Way Home, it's the entire Homecoming trilogy. Now, I know what you're thinking. We didn't spend 40 minutes at the beginning of Homecoming watching Peter before he became Spider-Man, ultimately seeing Uncle Ben die, and then getting like a 20-minute suit building montage. But what we do get is something much more meaningful. We get a true story told in 3 parts. We see this kid who is a hero being brought up to the highest of highs before ultimately being brought down by his own decisions in each and every film. As he grows as a person and a hero, the loss he experiences just becomes bigger and bigger. But in order to explain why No Way Home is the perfect start to this Spider-Man story that we have in the MCU, we have to quickly go back to some past Spider-Man films, starting with Homecoming. In Homecoming, Peter loves being Spider-Man, but he constantly wants to be more. Tony Stark is his mentor, but also kind of like his father figure or Uncle Ben in this universe. And all Peter wants is for Tony to let him be an Avenger. But throughout this film, we see exactly why Tony doesn't want him to be an Avenger yet. Peter looks at the conflict that he faces in this film with such a childish mind that there's no way that he can be seen as an Avenger yet. I mean, the whole thing with Vulture, yes, what he's doing is wrong, but he's doing it to support his daughter and his family, and this Peter Parker can't look past that. And I think this movie ending the way it does, with him getting a new suit as a thanks from Tony Stark, is kind of the thing that turns people off of the Spider-Man, because they're like, oh no, it's such a happy story, it's a feel-good story. Where is the darkness? Where is the defeat and the pain and the suffering that he has to suffer from being this double life Peter Parker and Spider-Man? But that's the beauty of this trilogy. We get to see this over time. We finally get to see Peter Parker as a teen living as Spider-Man, how he would be, how he acts in Homecoming. And now we move on to Far From Home, where we start seeing the real consequences of being Peter Parker and his own decisions. So first, he's suffering a lot of trauma from losing Iron Man in Endgame, obviously, who, like I said, is his Uncle Ben in this universe, at this point at least. And he's feeling this immense pressure to live up to what Tony Stark did in the Avengers, and he wants to kind of fill that role, but obviously he's not ready for it. And obviously one of people's biggest problems is in the point of Far From Home where he gets gifted the Edith goggles. But this gift from Tony Stark just truly shows the decisions that Peter Parker makes that lead to his own downfall. Really, looking back at it now, the Edith glasses lead to everything that happens in No Way Home directly. He is given the super powerful piece of technology by Tony Stark, and he's so easily fooled and relinquishes it to the villain, Mysterio, because his insecurities as being a hero are so easily exposed and exploited by Mysterio, and he faces the ultimate punishment for it when Mysterio falsely incriminates Spider-Man at the end of this film. And while I will agree, I do not think Far From Home on its own is one of the best Spider-Man movies, but as a step in this Peter Parker's origin story in the MCU, it is massive. Now that we're at No Way Home, Peter still kind of has a childish outlook on things. As I said, compared to other Spider-Man, he has had a pretty easy going. He had big loss with Iron Man, and now at the end of Far From Home he experienced loss, but he still became an Avenger so early on and got all this tech, and he feels like he is just bigger than everything. He thinks he can just go to Doctor Strange and have a spell and just have everything be okay. And maybe he was right, but yet again we see another setback by his own decisions. He keeps trying to change the spell as Strange is casting it. And it's because of a selfish reason. He doesn't want to let go of Ned Leeds and MJ and having his Aunt May know about him being Spider-Man, and he doesn't want to lose those relationships. That's important. He does not want to lose those relationships. That is the one thing he wants to stay the same. Everything else he wants changed. So Peter doing this ultimately leads to the villains from other universes coming here, which leads to another decision of Peter Parker's that leads to his own downfall. But finally, it's not for his own selfish reasons. He makes a decision that is best for others, and it still causes him harm. He wants to save and cure these villains. He doesn't want to just send them back to die. He understands where they're coming from and that they can change, which, like I said, after going after the Vulture for just petty crimes in the first movie in Spider-Man Homecoming, and after being so wronged by Mysterio in the second, he still has now grown to the point where he believes he can save these heroes and change them. But as being Spider-Man comes with, this leads to a ton of loss and his ultimate downfall, even though he ultimately achieves his goal of saving the villains. Norman Osborn kills Aunt May, which makes Peter start questioning if it's even worth it to save these villains. He wants vengeance. He wants to kill Norman Osborn. Defeat it. He doesn't have the childlike mind anymore. He doesn't see the good in it anymore. He just wants revenge. And ultimately, he makes the hardest decision that he's had to make in his entire time in the MCU. He lets go of the one thing he didn't want to get rid of. He lets go of his relationship with Ned and MJ, as he knows that them being close to him with everything as it was before Doctor Strange cast the final spell was too dangerous for them, and he picks other safety over his own happiness, and he is truly alone at the end of this movie. And this is the Peter Parker story. He can't have the things he wants. He wants to live this Peter Parker and Spider-Man life and have the great relationship and have friends and save the world, but he can't do it all. He has to make the ultimate sacrifice, and he does it at the end of No Way Home. I think there's a line that got kind of overlooked that made Peter be okay with this decision. It comes with Tobey and Andrew's Spider-Man. When all three Spider-Man are talking to each other and they're deciding that they need to fight as a group and that they are not used to that, our MCU Spider-Man says that he's been a part of the Avengers, so he knows how to fight in a group. And the line that got thrown in as a joke that I think is going over people's heads is that the other two Peters don't know what Avengers are. They've never been in a group, and yet they've still been successful Peter Parkers. They've done it on their own. And I truly feel like this one line is what made our Spider-Man decide at the end that he's okay with losing everything and everybody knowing who he is, because if the other Spider-Man could do it on their own, he now feels like he can too. And while I'm sure in a couple years after maybe the Spider-Man 4 or even Spider-Man 5, there's going to be a Young Avengers or another Avengers with Spider-Man in it, this is huge for his character and for his next film, and I believe this is what makes him be okay with losing Ned, MJ, and all his connections to the Avengers, and he can become his own hero without the pressure of being an Avenger. He doesn't have to live up to Tony Stark's legacy anymore, and these were his two biggest problems in Homecoming and Far From Home. Homecoming obviously was him wanting to be an Avenger, and Far From Home was dealing with living up to Tony's legacy now that he's gone. So I know there's still going to be people out there that relentlessly hate on the MCU Spider-Man just because it's not the same old, same old. Personally, I think this is the greatest take on Spider-Man we've seen, and if you can't appreciate these other two films, especially after No Way Home, then maybe you're just not as big as a Spider-Man fan as you say you are. But let me know, am I completely wrong here, or do you agree with me? I want to hear all your thoughts down in the comments, and I'd really appreciate it if you hit subscribe, check out my other videos here, and I'll see you guys in the next one.